Welcome everyone to today's lecture by Bas van de Poel of Space 10. My name is Clay Odom, Associate Professor in the School of Architecture and Co-Chair of the Lectures and Exhibitions Committee with David Heyman. Please be sure to join us next week for the second to last lecture of the series this fall. Stay tuned to the social channels of the SOA for additional information on that, and we'll see you next week. It's really a pleasure to welcome Bas to the School of Architecture. Bas van de Poel is Creative Director at Space 10, IKEA's experimental research and design lab based in Copenhagen, Denmark. Bas just let us know that he's working in Amsterdam right now, so their work environment is a global one. With the stated goal to research the societal, environmental, and technical shifts likely to impact everyday life, Space 10 engages many of the major changes expected to affect people, society, and our planet today and in the years to come. I first came into contact with the work of Space 10 because basically much of the research that they produce is publicly available and shared, which I think is a fantastic aspect of the work. And what I find extremely interesting is that maybe most likely stemming from the deep linkage with IKEA, the basic research agenda of Space 10 touches explicitly on the everyday lived experience of people, often in interior environments, and how these small scale conditions are bound up with many of the most pressing global issues of our day, from the environment and commerce to technology and other societal shifts. I found the work in that way to be clear-eyed about our current, about the current state of the world and the challenges we all face, while also being optimistic and projective as they address these issues. In short, acting as designers. In today's lecture, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, which I love. Bas will discuss Space 10's approach to research and design, zeroing in on prospects for reimagining architecture and interiors through the lens of new and emerging technologies. It's a real pleasure to welcome Bas van de Poel to the SOA. Thank you, Bas, and we're really happy to have you. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Clay. I'll start sharing my screen. Is it good on your end? That's great. Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. It's always weird to talk into this empty void, but I guess it's better than nothing. I mean, in an ideal scenario, I would have been physically with you, but it's still a pleasure to be here. So yes, we are Space 10. And we are a research and design lab on a mission to create a better everyday life for people and the planet. We are, sorry, I'm just gonna hide my, yeah, here we go. We are fully funded by IKEA, meaning that we work under IKEA's vision. But we still have the autonomy to look into different explorations we deem relevant. And I think the beauty of working for IKEA is that, you know, like both they're a very social driven organization. They really have their hearts in the right places. They're very committed, you know, to people and planet. Also very quite aggressive climate goals of being climate positive by 2030 already. And we can sort of like utilize IKEA's terraforming capabilities to really create impact at scale. And we're based in Copenhagen. This is our office. We're based in the heart of the meatpacking district, and this is our upstairs where we work with different project teams until recently, I have to say. And this is our test kitchen where we sort of like look into future foods and sort of like the potential to eat more sustainable and healthy. We also have a downstairs space that is open to the public, where we have a little cafe, and also a gallery where we sort of like exhibit our latest projects. And then we also do a lot of series of events. And sometimes we also like to throw a party now and then. And downstairs in the basement, we have something called the workshop, where we have 3D printers and CNC machines that sort of like allow us to rapidly prototype new ideas and projects. We also pop up in many places. We popped up in Shanghai during London Design Week, and more recently we also opened up a satellite office in India that sort of like actively engaged with the local community when we were there. So as Clay mentioned, we're looking into the societal, environmental, and technological shifts that are influencing the everyday life of the many. And I mean, for societal shifts, we really look into how certain trends impact sort of like our cultural rituals and sort of like everyday lives. And I think sort of like COVID-19 is a quite explicit example of that one. We also look into sort of like the global climate crisis we're currently facing and find suitable responses to that. And also investigating how technology is changing our everyday experience of both the physical and digital world. And basically what we're trying to do is to see patterns in this chaotic world and sort of like give a response to these patterns. We strongly believe though that it's impossible sort of like to change the world by ourselves for the better. So that's also why we very much actively engage with external partners. And this is also like a direct reference to the title of this talk. We see ourselves as an interface for innovation, and we sort of like have a small core team of 25 people. And then we work a lot with external collaborators, and this really allows us to cover a lot of different discourses and different grounds. And often we work up to 150 different collaborators at the same time, which makes us quite scalable as well. Then we also do residence. Currently, we have a residency going on in collaboration with Arena, exploring the new everyday life and looking into mental health within the confines of the home during a global pandemic, which is actually really fascinating. We kicked it off last Friday. There are people from Lagos, India, Iceland, really interesting group of people we're very pleased to work with. And then we also collaborated with institutions like Harvard GST, Stroke Institute in Moscow, and MIT. And we do a lot of community-driven events to really sort of like inspire people and engage with our mission. And this talk is a quite explicit example of that as well. And so far, so good. I mean, our approach seems to be working, as Fast Company named us one of the most innovative companies of 2019. So today, I would like to discuss the role of the architect when digital is changing the way we design and experience our physical environment. And I would like to explore this question according to 3 different cases we've been doing in the past years. Our most recent one is called Everyday Experiments. Then I will sort of like dive a little bit deeper into the driverless future called Space on Wheels, and then to end with Be Home. And then I would love to have an open floor where we can have a debate and discuss in detail. So the first one, Everyday Experiments. It's a fact that nearly half of all people on the planet today own a smartphone. But in order to understand how we got here, we actually need to go back a little bit in history. and look at the very first personal computer. And in order to operate this clunky, nostalgic machine, you had to be able to code or to program. So you had to know commands and syntaxes in order to operate this machine, which made it not really accessible for a lot of people. Then we moved on towards the graphical user interface introduced by Apple, which already sort of like democratized technology a lot more, because suddenly you would be able to see and sort of like have a direct effect of your actions and movements with the mouse. And 13 years ago, Apple again introduced the smartphone, which gave us all sort of like computational power in our pockets, and using gestures, it even more democratized technology. So two things we're very interested in looking at Space 10 are, obviously, what are sort of like the interfaces that we need to design on top of the billion mobile devices that are in the world today, and also what will be the next billion technology platform, and what will these interfaces going to look like. And if you sort of like plot what we just discussed on an S-curve, you see that like the first paradigm was personal computer. Now we're living in the second paradigm of mobile computing. However, we are reaching sort of like a large scale. A lot of people have a smartphone these days, and we see less one more thing type of innovation happening. So the big question is, what is the next paradigm? And at Space 10, we strongly believe it's a multitude of different technologies, which we call spatial computing, directly influencing the physical environment and reality of today. An example of what we call spatial computing are voice interfaces, touch, vision, and basically technologies that create a frictionless experience between the world and yourself. And they're very much complementary to human behavior. So you don't need to actually learn a new technology in order to operate it. And so Everyday Experiments explores what the impact of these emerging technologies will be on our everyday life at home. And sort of like we sort of like started investigating this larger question on the Everyday Experiments platform, which you can visit through everydayexperiments.com, and basically invites the world's most progressive design and technology studios to explore what sort of like the possibilities of these technologies are in terms of contributing to a better everyday life. And here's a little clip to sort of like give a recap of that platform. One of the experiments that was conducted by a studio in London called Man vs. Machine looked at how sort of like augmented reality could show you what sort of like the effect of a newly bought light source would be. So you could basically switch between time zones, season, weather conditions, and locations to really real time sort of like see the effect of that lamp basically. Another project they did looked at like augmenting sound using augmented reality, and basically see sort of like the effect of sound waves on your space, and see how sound travels in your space, and basically instruct what the best position for your newly purchased speaker would be. This is also an interesting one by a studio called Bakken and Beck, which we often collaborate with. What you're looking at right now on the left is basically a neural network trained on more than 1,000 chairs, and sort of like the algorithms learned what a chair is basically. So like and would be able to generate entirely new chairs based off thousands of previous examples, and then you could actually in real time mold that chair as a carpenter in virtual reality, which is a quite interesting experience. And this is an experiment by Field that basically looks into basically transforms your living room or any space in the home into a musical instrument. So sort of like different points in your home would sort of like create almost like an ambient type of soundtrack. The second case I would like to discuss is called Space on Wheels. And the starting point for this particular case was this quote by a tech analyst called Benedict Evans. And he states that calling a self-driving car a car is like calling a car a horseless carriage. And what he means by that if we think about sort of like the traditional notion of self-driving cars, it's actually a quite limited scope. Because like when we suddenly don't have to worry about driving anymore, vehicle interiors can expand to a point where we stop thinking of them as vehicles, and they actually become like this self-driving architecture to some extent. And together with a studio called Foam, based out of Berlin, we developed like this system that basically sort of like speculates into the future. So what we're based on our research belief is that in the future there will be a few car makers or that deliver like a self-driving base system that enables brands, organizations, even architecture studios to build anything on top, and it would almost like work like an SDK or software development kit, similar to for instance Google Play Store or like the Apple App Store, where basically developers can build new applications on top of the existing ecosystem of a Google and Apple. And basically, in order to explore this, we looked at the daily activities in people's lives and sort of like projected that onto different automobiles or self-driving vehicles, which we call Space on Wheels. So we looked at an hotel on wheels that sort of like can drive you from a city to a city whilst you're sleeping, an office on wheels, which could be quite convenient in times of COVID, a cafe on wheels as well. And even we looked at sort of like bringing the IKEA catalog to life, and basically you would be able to order like that catalog, or like a showroom almost in front of your doorstep. We looked at how augmented reality could give a certain real-time experience in the windshield and turning sort of like the physical environment into a real-time game. Or for educational purposes, it could also be used for history lessons and so forth. And the last one, Farm on Wheels, is a hydroponic farm basically that sort of like promise you to deliver food as fresh as it gets at your doorstep. And we also created this app, almost like a speculative Uber, that actually still sits in the Apple App Store, which you can download. And it basically allows you to order one of these self-driving vehicles, and you could watch it real time using augmented reality in your street. So just to make the future very tangible. And I think what is for us interesting about these kind of projects is that they're highly visual, right? So it's I think often research is very dense and not very accessible. But what sort of like our intent with these kind of projects really is to create like a Northern Star that people can work towards and engage with and actively, you know, have discussions around this, rather than like purely the dense research. So it's really like connecting the left and the right brain, if you like. And I would like to conclude finally with a case study which we also quite recently did called Bee Home. And this is very much informed that a third of the world's food supply depends on pollination of solitary bees, which makes these bees actually very vital for all life on our planet Earth. However, currently these species are about to become extinct with all the serious consequences ahead of itself, and that's mostly due to human impact, actually. So solitary bees don't really thrive when sort of like their natural habitat is becoming extinct due to urbanization. You know, they don't thrive well in pesticides and monoculture sort of like environments. What they do like are, you know, natural habitats and flowers. And this was very much the starting point, you know, for this particular design project. So Bee Home is a free and open source design that helps restore the relationship between solitary bees, people, and planet. And basically, it's sort of like a beautiful design that, in true IKEA spirit, people can assemble themselves. And it comes in many shapes and forms. Each Bee Home is unique. And you can sort of like stick it in the ground or you know, mount it to a wall. And we did this in collaboration again with Bakken and Beck, who was responsible for the digital interface, which I will come to, and Tanita Klein, who was a resident at Space 10, and she is an architect, and she very much applied architectural principles to the actual design of the Bee Home. So she looked at sort of like different examples when it comes to modular stacking. She was very much inspired by brutalism, and also bricks played an important role in the final design, as you perhaps can see. Another important influence on this project is this quote by Nikolai, who's a dear friend from ours, associated with Strelka, basically stating that, you know, the CNC machine is the iPhone of architecture, meaning, you know, that it sort of like really enables people and empowers people to also participate, perhaps in this more elitist discourse. So from that point, we sort of like explored how an open source approach can improve the way we design, fabricate, and distribute physical products. So, you know, like instead of offering these Bee Homes on a website and sort of like ship them around the globe, you know, which from a sustainability practice point of view is not really great, and also like doesn't really live up to our personal mission, but also, yeah, conflicts with the interest of solitary bees. We actually enable people on the platform to design their Bee Home themselves using computational design principles in a very sort of like accessible way. And then, you know, you can also sort of like adjust the position, the height of the actual Bee Home, the amount of floors, and then sort of like use the shuffle button in the right corner to generate new designs on the fly. And each design would be truly unique and truly yours. And you could even watch it in AR before you actually decide to download the files for the CNC. And then on a world map, you can actually see what is the nearest CNC shop or fab lab near you. And then with these downloadable files, you can go to that CNC place and basically hand them over to the expert there. And then they will sort of like fabricate that design on the spot for you. So it's completely decentralized and distributed. And then, as mentioned on the left, you'll see the world map where people can actually upload their unique bee home design in situ. And we're quite pleased to see, that actually a lot of people have already participated in this project and have been actively sharing their bee homes. So thank you very much. And I think it would be great just to get to some more general questions and open up the floor. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thanks, Bas. I'm sure there are tons of questions out there, and we have plenty of time to have a longer ranging discussion.
Yeah, maybe just like as a talk of, I've also been very much mindful of that this was like a Zoom presentation, because I find it quite difficult actually to focus, for longer than 30 minutes on a Zoom call. So yeah. Let's engage. Basically.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. We can open the floor. If you would, if you ask a question, please do it with your video on, and I will field them with hands or.
I have a question, Clay.
Great. Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really fun for me to listen to. Just as a preface, I'm a historian with a flip phone, so I'm in the I'm in the other 50%. This is probably a naive question, but now that you know my background, maybe it's okay to ask. So based on your last discussion about the Beehive and making that available, for people to download locally, one of the things that I struggle with and I think about with technology and some of the things you were talking about, especially like the autonomous objects that would, drive around and allow for different flexibility of program, is this relationship between, or the problem of having things be accessible and deliverable from greater geographies and distances, and how making things accessible more quickly is not good for the planet, I think, because of the transportation and the energy costs. And yet it seems as though we're figuring out sort of cleaner ways to continue to make things more accessible from greater distances. So I was wondering what your studio thinks about this question of facilitating design, like in addition to what you're doing, which seems really exciting, facilitating design that allows for people to have hyper-local solutions for objects and things that they need, or facilitating design that also allows for people to have like non-monetized interactions and responses for taking care of food needs or intellectual needs. And if that, that is obviously something IKEA probably wouldn't be interested in, but I was just curious to hear your own kind of perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sarah. First of all, I love your flip phone. I think the whole point of Bee Home was actually that it's not being shipped overseas, so that people actually would be able to download the software files and produce it locally. So basically, like you would cut sort of like any transportation cost, and also you can produce it with local materials. So for us, like this kind of product would be sort of like the ultimate vision, perhaps for IKEA as well, right? Where sort of like you can sort of like produce objects at scale using local materials within a certain local context. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, and I think in that sense, IKEA is very much interested in that, and also like to be challenged, because as I mentioned, they have quite aggressive climate goals and try to be climate positive by 2030. So they're also very much aware that they need to reinvent themselves and really sort of like innovate new kinds of business models, to keep up with current times and the current state and reality of the world we live in. And I think, I think one of an example, I mean, we haven't been involved with that, but like coming from IKEA, which I really liked, is sort of like their approach to Black Friday, in which basically they offer people to buy back secondhand furniture for double the price. So I think these kind of initiatives are actually quite rewarding for both people and planet, but also for for me personally to be associated with such a global company that obviously has a lot of impact on the planet, but at the same time can also have a lot of positive impact on people's lives and the system in which it operates as well.
Great, thank you.
I think there's a question from Dean Addington. Michelle?
Hi, thank you so much for that. I was really taken by the, in the middle of the talk where you sort of compared, or sort of our problem is comparing a car to a horseless carriage, an autonomous vehicle to a self-driving car, that we always operate relationally. And, we always sort of like deal with the baseline as our frame of reference. And, one of the difficulties that we have in our fields is that precedent drives the way that we teach, it drives the way that we think. So we're always operating in that sort of slow evolutionary stance of how we move forward, much slower, by the way, than how technology moves forward. So we're always behind because we're sort of always moving relationally as opposed to whether we consider it disjunctively, revolutionarily. We don't do those things. We move very, very slowly, always in relationship to what we know, what we do and what we know. And I work in smart materials and smart systems, and I've always been fascinated that all of the great images and initiatives on smart buildings always just automate that which we already do. The door that automatically opens, the HVAC system that automatically responds to my body. But the idea of it truly being revolutionary is not something that we're able to think about, because we're always moving in that slow way where we depend so much on precedent to define what it is that we do. So I'm really intrigued, by how you have conversations, how you have discourse that actually slices through that. You can't just be disjunctive because you want to be disjunctive. I'm thinking there has to be sort of a different approach that you all are using that allows you to get away from the idea of precedent.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think before I answer your question, I think I think the fact, like this Zoom call is actually a perfect example of that, right? It feels so static, like I'm talking to you, but like I just need to talk into a camera. Like why cannot, like you're facing on the left of the screen, like why can I not just talk that way? Like why isn't there like a spatial interface when it comes to these type of interface? And I think like as an example, like Zoom was designed pre-COVID, right, in a world where we didn't spend like 8 hours a day on a screen. And like I think for those conditions it's fine actually to have interactions like these, but like it becomes quite tiresome if you need to do this for 8 hours a day. So I think actually we will see a lot of new types of ways to video conference quite soon. But to come back to your question, I think like we have this ethos at Space 10 that we're not built to last but to evolve. And I think our company structure and the way we work has very much evolved in the past 5 years. I think the only thing that has sort of like remained the same, somewhat similar, I mean, like the wording has been different throughout times, but is our mission of creating a better everyday life for both people and planet, which is quite relevant for at least the next hundreds of years, I guess. And I think the way we really try to think outside of the box basically is to really actively engage with experts from all different discourses, right? So not like we work with architects, with engineers, with machine learning specialists, like with space engineers, with people specialized in hydroponic farming, with chefs, with speculative designers. And I think sort of like all these different viewpoints really help us shape shift sort of like current paradigms. And I think another important aspect is really like these community engagements like we're doing now. Like instead of me talking for like an hour, okay, let's cut it to 30, and then like have an active conversation with all of us, but also very much inviting people in from all over the world to challenge our notions in the form of residencies. So I think we have basically, there's no single answer to your question, but I think we have different methodologies basically in which we actively try to pursue to not be a static form, perhaps.
I mean, it seems, Boz, like that's about starting to dissolve some of the barriers, or some of the perceived barriers between all of those diverse, heterogeneous areas of knowledge. It seems like that's maybe a core goal for you, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and frankly, also quite culturally speaking, right? Because I mean, especially like when you look into the field of technology, it's like tomorrow's conversations in the form of voice interfaces, for instance, are very much determined by white males in their 30s making more than $100,000 a year. So like that also very much influences the way they sort of like develop these technologies, and sort of like the biases that are inherent to them. Perhaps the same is true for architecture. I don't know, but I think that's something like we're very aware of, and we're not perfect by all means, but it's actually something we really try to actively pursue, to really have like diversity in like disciplines, but also from like a cultural and geographical point of view. And also I think it's also if you look at technology, for instance, like how technology operates in sort of like Western parts of the world versus China is completely different, right? And there are completely different rules and sort of like rituals around how people use these technologies.
That's great. It's maybe the bee analogy. It's the bee dot in a monoculture. David Heyman, I think, has a question.
Yeah, hey, boss. Thank you so much for coming, man. It's been just a super interesting talk, and especially hope that after the COVID kind of slowly wears away, we could send students to you. I just think that what you guys do is really remarkable. I have a question which is kind of a little bit outside the office. So, I mean, I'm particularly interested in the whole question about whether or not the kind of free market will ever solve sustainability. And it's this big, I think of the free market and the kind of capital economy as kind of like our shitty boyfriend. It's this thing that we have to keep turning to because we're hooked on it. But in the long run, it may not actually solve our problems. So I'm wondering, like when you're talking about the kind of goals at IKEA, which like as a kind of this kind of marketplace engine that actually could make a real difference in terms of sustainable materials, sustainable technologies, and the spread of their consumption. But at the same time, we don't exactly see that happening as a kind of shift in the way they advertise or a shift in the way they distribute. I mean, could you talk to us a little bit more about how that change is actually being affected as opposed to just in name at IKEA? It's just a really interesting question about how they have such clout and they could have such an impact. And I wonder a little bit, again, I know it's not your specific realm of responsibility, and yet you must interface with that part of IKEA often. And so I'm interested to hear a little bit more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like, first of all, like, you know, as a global company at that scale, to sort of like publicly state to be climate positive by 2030 is like, it's a pretty bold statement. And actually they reaffirmed that statement, you know, after the pandemic. Actually, they stressed sort of like the importance and sort of like they actually mentioned sort of like that sort of like this pandemic is, you know, is a direct cause of you know, how we treat our planet, basically. And then there are like different initiatives, basically, you know, from the introduction of like vegetarian meatballs, you know, to cut down like meat consumption, to you know, like the way their products are fabricated, you know, from purely sustainable products, materials, to, you know, like also completely new business models, such as, you know, rental, you know. And I think especially like with that rental model, it's actually quite interesting, because it's actually super difficult to become circular if you don't, you know, control the entire ecosystem, meaning that it's you know, if you would subscribe, you know, to a lamp, for instance, right? IKEA is basically responsible for you know, like that the lamp works. If it doesn't work, you would perhaps be able to return it and then, you know, receive a different lamp, but that lamp would then be taken back into the ecosystem, and those kind of things they are actively exploring and doing a lot of pilots. And I think, you know, like with these kind of, you know, big problems, as you correctly point out, there's not like a silver bullet solution, right? So like, instead of like having one solution, it's a multitude of like smaller initiatives that, you know, hopefully in the end will work towards that big goal.
It's just really fascinating to me. I mean, part of the reason I'm asking the question is I'm sitting here while I'm listening to you talk, I'm drawing renovations to my own house. And part of the renovations is I'm sitting on, you know, 20-year-old IKEA bookshelves that I bought when our children were young. And now they're kind of like, they really have to kind of go, you know, and I'm going at this, you know, I feel absolutely guilty that these things have to go, and yet they have to go, you know, and so so part of my question had to do with this kind of larger sense of IKEA shifting from a kind of, not a throwaway culture, but it is in a way, like right, in many ways it's this kind of an idea of starter furniture for this kind of but to me, the idea that they might be shifting over to a kind of rental or 100% recyclable system of conceiving their projects is actually really fascinating. I mean, it's just,
yeah, and I think it's also, yeah, thanks. I mean, I think it's also like, you know, like you're saying, like throwaway, or like, you know, or like perhaps not intended like cheap furniture, but like I think that's also very much you know, from like a US cultural perspective. I mean, you know, like IKEA is basically perceived as a very expensive designer brand in a lot of parts of the world, you know, like for instance, India or you know, like Thailand or Indonesia.
Right.
People perceive IKEA, and I think that's also, you know, it's a global company. It's like, it's not like an Apple, basically, that's basically like hitting for a luxury market. So, you know, to you know, become circular is actually quite difficult when you're also, you know, when you are for the many people and really try to make affordable design for people's homes and lives.
Yeah, it's a really, really great point. I mean, I'm particularly interested. Man, I wish we could keep you for another hour. I just, I literally, I'm so interested in how the difference between how IKEA is going to operate in the US, where again, the clout it has is so remarkable, as opposed to how it already operates in societies where certain sets of values are already theoretically in place. But look, good luck, man. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I'll open this up to other questions.
Thanks, David.
That's great. There's a student question from one of our grad students, Mohsen and Saftaran. Mohsen?
Hi, boss. Thank you so much for today. So much informative, and it was so very interesting to me. So I have a couple of questions. One is that there was an animated diagram that you collected all of the information, and after that you started to design the cars, the spaces on the cars. I was wondering how you collected the information. I mean, what was your resource of the research? Also, I'm wondering that actually this one is I wanted to add to the discussion that Sarah said about the sustainability of these spaces on the wheels. So I wanted to add that, for example, if we considering the supply chain, that can be virtual too in future, and I think it's not so much far from us. And my second question is, if you think that if we continue using all of these virtual reality, all of XR realities, at the end, it increased the diversity or it decreased the diversity, because we are feeding, we are collecting data for some companies, and actually we are working somehow for them freely. At the end, what do you think, that decreased diversity or increased diversity? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I mean, for your first question, the source for these daily activities we used to dictate the designs of the autonomous vehicles is called the American Time Use Survey. And then I think I can just look it up. There was also like a company, ATIS Extract Builder, made a beautiful data visualization of it. So I think it's a pretty thick numbered report, but they use sort of like computational power to bring it to life, which we're very grateful of. In terms of your second question, I mean, I don't think there's like a singular answer, right? I mean, it's also, you know, it's the reason why is that, you know, at its core, technology is objective. It's not bad or good, you know, it's how people, or like how companies in this case, are actually utilizing it. And I think it's a very valid question, right? I mean, I think from like an IKEA point of view, we highly regard people's privacy, and there's also like an ethical steering committee when it comes to sort of like you know, sort of like the appliances of technologies. I think especially for, you know, like for augmented reality and mixed reality, I think it's gonna be fascinating and perhaps also a little bit scary to see how that will evolve. I mean, if you just look at the most recent Facebook AR Labs presentation, they literally, you know, sort of like depicted some sort of like mirror world where everything, you know, like through those spectacles you're wearing is being recorded in real time and virtually mapped. So what these big tech companies, and I think this is also like a hugely important question, which, you know, I actually haven't really hearing being discussed within the architectural discourse, but basically these big tech companies are sort of like creating a virtual version of the real world. And so they're basically like, when you enter a room, that room is being mapped, and that's already happening, you know, like the technology is already there. Like in the latest iPhone and iPads, there's a technology called LiDAR, which is also being used for self-driving cars to make sense of the environment. And basically they're able to map, you know, like an entire room, you know, to transform that room into a 3D model, basically. Then on top of that, things like AI and machine learning are being applied, which enables computers, algorithms, or actually those companies to identify the objects that are in a room. So like, they can identify that a chair is a chair, or a couch is a couch, or a painting is a painting, and they can even identify, which artist created that painting based off the large data sets they already collected. I even saw like an example where like Facebook was able to maybe it's speculative, but like the fact that Facebook is presenting it, it's like you walk into a room with those glasses on, you walk out of that room and you're like, oh shit, I forgot my keys. Then basically, because you walked in that room, they can sort of like spot where your keys are and sort of like have like arrows pointing at those keys. So I mean, and that's that's actually like a quite nice utility, right? Like, I mean, when you lose your keys, it's great that you actually can find them using this technology. But I mean, yeah, it quickly turns Black Mirror, basically, if you think ahead, sort of like. But again, I mean, like it's very much dependent on, like how these companies sort of like treat, people's privacy and domain. I mean, I truly believe that, privacy can be more and more become beneficial for tech companies to include in their business strategy, because I believe, if you can afford to go, with a more private option, you might as well. Sorry for the long answer.
No, thank you.
That's a really interesting. I mean, that builds on maybe I have one question maybe that might be able to sort of close us out for the hour. But it goes a little bit to what you were just starting to talk about, Bas, is this sort of basically this notion of sort of increasingly ambient, ubiquitous technology and interface. Like once the phone actually goes away as the interface, and it's really spread out in terms of how we access or use or interface with that data without the need for the hardware. How do you see that in the next S curve, or maybe the S curve beyond that one, in terms of like, do you start to think about like what happens to questions of innovation, which I see as being sort of core to the underlying kind of like things that you're doing at Space 10. How do you see innovation or how we even interface with the data itself changing in those incoming years, right? Like as the programming and as the interfaces become deeper into the background, what does that do to us as creative people as we engage that? Will I be able to get the SDK for our kit for the iPhone to access the LiDAR in 15 years, right?
Yeah. I think it's very difficult to predict. Like, I think it's very, like it's very interesting, right? Like if you, like when the first iPhone was released, like they didn't even have like, you wouldn't, like developers weren't able to create their own apps. There wasn't an app store. And then they, then they opened up the app store, and we got like shaving apps and beer drinking apps.
Yeah.
But like could you and that's like 10 years ago when they opened it up or something. Like could you have ever predicted 10 years ago that we would have Tinder babies today, or that you would be able to like order an Uber? Mm-hmm. Or like, so I think I mean it's very, very difficult sort of like to predict the ripple effects of a certain technology on our lives and on our society, to be quite frank. I mean, it's and this is only 13 years old, right? Like this technology, and it radically changed how we live our lives and how we spend our times and how we connect with people, and how like people in underdeveloped countries are using it as a way to educate themselves. I mean, it has profound implications, and I think it's very difficult to sort of like speculate beyond sort of like the 10-year time frame.
Right.
I mean, brain interfaces. that's perhaps.
Well, that's what I mean.
Let's not go there.
That's what I mean. That's kind of what I'm wondering. Like, what does it do to a model, to a design model that's based on innovation and such as yours, and what does it do for creative process in general moving forward? It seems like there might be one more. There are actually a couple more questions, but I totally overlooked Lalitha. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Hi. Okay. I'm going to talk about it in terms of time, and a very different kind of time. And I'm not from the School of Architecture, but the others know who I am by now, so I'm just going to give that a miss. But I'm a film studies scholar in a very, very shorthand. So my question is, when you were describing the great moment of being in a room and you have this interface, etc. Sorry, I have to be really quick. The false moment is that of keys. Who needs keys in your new world? So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, it sort of seems like, who needs keys? I mean, we're going to have, so having said that, I am from, it sort of seems like, huh? What's that?
No,
like,
it's such a fair, like, I mean, that's yeah.
But
that's,
the question.
you should point that back at Facebook. I think it's
no, I have no desire to. I'm not on
yeah.
Facebook, and I will never be on Facebook. So that's not the issue. The issue is this: India. I live both in India and here. I'm a US citizen. I have to say that, but I'm of Indian origin. So I want to say this: India was the last place to push back on IKEA arriving. Okay, out of all the emerging economies, India was the last one. It's for environmental reasons. Environmental movement is really strong. But the other thing is, we have a very old crafts tradition in India. And IKEA's modularity and its rampant arrival and its so-called affordability for the emerging middle class was that the old crafts tradition, where you would have a carpenter who would come and do the work in your house and nothing would be perfect and modular, would now be disappearing. So there is that. And there's also a communal issue based with this, because most of the carpenters tend to come from the Muslim community. So this is very, very complicated. So for me, what I'm interested in your kind of, I want to drink your Kool-Aid. It's slightly difficult, unlike, I'm very proud that I don't have a single piece of IKEA furniture in my house. I believe in recycled. Okay, but the bathroom has. So I want to say that as well. But what I want to ask is, there seems to be such an, on your part, which is quite lovely, such an emphasis on consensus in your studio. But what I'm curious is of failed projects that never went off. Like some crank like me showing up at your desk, right, from somewhere and sort of saying, it's not sustainable. Like, what are we going to do with power cuts, for example? And I mean, it's no smart house is possible if you're going to have, or if you're going to have power cuts, and if your internet breaks down, etc. Right? So I'm curious about, power cut is the extreme version of this. I'm curious about what projects never took off, right? What projects, that is, you were talking about. If you have time, it's like, it's already 2:00, but if we could actually talk about not the moment where you all agree that this is a great project for hydroponics, but what if you had a project that you all disagreed about, like the art of failure, basically.
Well, I think, I mean, yeah, well, thank you. And also thank you for I guess, that very important context on, how also like how IKEA might be culturally be perceived by some in India. I think that's also very important, to discuss openly. And I'm happy actually that you addressed that. I think we really have this strong belief that sort of like the longer we work in a vacuum, the more likely we are to fail. Meaning sort of like that everything we do, we inherently put out in the world. And some projects continue and take off, and some are just remain speculative ideas and never get adapted into the IKEA ecosystem. I think that's also when we have been maturing. I think that's something we really have learned, that the innovation is a pitcher catcher game, right? Like, you can throw a lot of beautiful, innovative, ideas and sort of like proposals at IKEA, but they should also be able to catch them and implement them in the ecosystem. And I think, the Urban Village project is a great example of that, where we sort of like proposed a more, form of it's a shared living concept that proposes more sustainable, livable, and affordable living for people in urban dense areas. And it's a huge project, but until now it hasn't been realized yet, and I'm not sure if that makes it a failure. I mean, it definitely sparks discussion, and what we're doing right here, I think it just engages people to think about about things like shared living, about circular models about like, the influence of technology on our lives. So, I mean, I think, I think it's an interesting question. What is the definition of a failure, right? And I don't think we have sort of like a traditional notion of what failure is, because we are inherently a research and design company. So it's not only about design, it's also about the research trajectory that leads to sort of like the actual realization or not, right? So I think it's also very much about asking the right questions, and also like redefining those questions based on input from people and from the community and from other designers.
Fantastic. I think this could go on a lot longer, but we've kind of reached the end of our time, unfortunately, with Bas. Bas, thank you so much for joining us. And I know it's not terribly late as Amsterdammers go, but it's after it's after.
I have a 9-month-old daughter. So.
Oh wow!
Like...
Well, then it is. Then it is for sure. But it's great to have you. It's been really fun to be able to sort of chat with you offline in other contexts before this as well. And I hope to continue that conversation. It's been really great.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, and really lovely to meet you all, and thank you so much for all the questions. It's it has been a super stimulating conversation. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, really awesome. Thanks so much, Bas. I'll be in touch. Thanks again.
Yeah, please do.